Welcome to week 3 of Intro to Business. This is Sean Canary. This week we'll be discussing Chapter 2, Economics and How It Affects Businesses. So, what is economics? Well, by definition, economics is the study of how society chooses to employ resources to produce goods and services and then distribute them for consumption among various competing groups and individuals. Now, there's two particular studies of economics: macroeconomics, which is the part of economics that looks at the operation of a nation's economy as a whole, and then microeconomics. Now, this is the part of that looks at the behavior of people and organizations within particular markets. So think of macroeconomics as a study of a nation's economy in a whole scale, whereas microeconomics may look at an individual category within a society. For instance, taking a look at the behavior of people and organizations such as Roman Catholics in the country, or maybe Roman Catholics in the state of Tennessee. Microeconomics looks at individual groups and organizations within particular markets. So that's important to keep very distinct. Macro is a look at the economics, the nation's economy as a whole, and micro is individual segments within that country. Resource development. So what is resource development? This is the study of how to increase resources and to create conditions that will make better use of those resources. Examples of ways to increase resources: new energy sources, right? Windmill power, maybe. New ways of growing foods, hydroponics. That's a great new way of growing food. And new ways of creating goods and services. We're always coming up with different ways to create new goods and services. The Industrial Revolution was an important resource development within our nation's history. So how economies affect businesses? Well, a gentleman thought and studied what he referred to as the dismal science. Thomas Malthus believed that if the rich had most of the wealth and the poor had most of the population, that resources would run out. This is why he called economics the dismal science. But the latest world statistics show that population is actually growing more slowly than expected. And if you look at population as a resource, some macroeconomists believe that a large population can actually be a resource. An educated population is highly valuable, and business owners actually provide jobs and economic growth for their employees and communities as well as for themselves. So the idea of the rich keep getting richer doesn't necessarily hold true, contrary to Malthus' belief. It actually could mean that, as a business owner, gets more wealth, he puts it back into his business, which goes back into the community. Adam Smith hypothesized the creation of wealth, and he believed that freedom was vital to any economy's survival. The freedom to own land or property and the right to keep all of the profits of a business is essential. People will only work hard if they believe that they're rewarded. Now, it's kind of interesting that he believes this. Some people believe that, and some people believe that people want to take pride in their work and don't necessarily need to be rewarded. So as you can see here, the study of economy, there's many different theories and many different ideas. Another idea would be the invisible hand theory. As people improve their own situation in life, they help the economy prosper through the productions of goods, services, and ideas. The invisible hand is that phrase is coined by Adam Smith to describe the process that turns self-directed gain into social and economic benefit for all. So, what I was saying before, whereas somebody is gaining wealth, it's actually going to benefit other people in the long run because they're going to end up distributing that wealth into the economy. Understanding the invisible hand theory, let's give you an example. A farmer earns money by selling his crops, right? The more crops he sells, the more money he acquires. And he wants to sell as many crops as he wants, so he's going to end up hiring people to help him manage his crops. When the farmer produces more, there's plenty of food for the community also. So the farmer and the employees are benefiting by selling those crops and earning money, but also the community is benefiting because there's a lot of food available to buy. The farmer's helped himself, his employees, and his community. So as you can see, the invisible hand theory may come into play. Another theory, another way to describe this in the 1980s was called the trickle-down effect, or trickle-down economics, right? And a lot of followers and fans of President Ronald Reagan believe that in trickle-down economics, where somebody gains wealth, other people will benefit from that. Capitalism, this is the first economic system that we're going to look at, and this is the economic system of the United States. However, we'll discuss in a later chapter that we're not a purely capitalistic society. We do have some socialism within our country, and when I say socialism here, don't be offended. I'm purely looking at socialism as a form of economics. So I know that that word is thrown around as an insult in today's climate. However, in this class, we'll only be looking at socialism as a study of economics. Capitalism is one of those economic systems, much like socialism. But capitalism is a system in which all or almost all of the factors of production distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. So the United States, England, Australia, Canada, these are all capitalistic societies and capitalistic systems. A very close relative of capitalism is state capitalism. This is a combination of freer markets and some government control over those markets. China is an example of state capitalism. A lot of the industries that are in China are actually run by the state or run by the government. So there's some capitalism going on, but some industries are actually owned and run and regulated by the government. So this is referred to as state capitalism. So under capitalism, there's 4 basic rights. The right for a business or a person to own private property, the right to own that business and keep all that business's profit, the right to freedom of competition, and the right to a freedom of choice and to be able to make business decisions how you see fit. Capitalism is based on these 4 rights. So understanding free market capitalism. So free market is where decisions about what and how much to produce are made by the market. Now consumers send signals about what they like and how they like it, right? Price tells companies how much of a product they should produce, and if something is wanted but hard to get, the price will rise until more products are available. And we're going to talk about supply and demand here. But in free market societies, in a free market society of capitalism, decisions about what and how much to produce are made by the market. Often when some people talk about starting a small business or starting a business, one of the first questions I ask them is, what is the market saying? Does the market want or demand this product or service? So you may have a wonderful idea for a business, but there's just no demand or need for it in that marketplace. Think about it. What if I sold suntan lotion and I lived in Antarctica, right? That'd be a pretty silly business to have up there. But if you look at what the market wants and needs, the market doesn't want and need a sunscreen in Antarctica. However, if you take a look at Tennessee right now, with everything going on in society with COVID, right? You notice that a lot of people are selling masks, right? I bet you could open up a Tennessee Vol mask store in Knoxville near the university, near the colleges, and actually make a pretty good money because there is need and demand for that product right now. But let's all hope that COVID is cured and we start seeing a vaccine, and you're going to notice that the want and demand for these masks are going to go down. This is what we mean by how a free market works and how prices are determined. A seller may want to sell his shirt or his mask for $50, but only a few people may buy them at that price. The seller lowers the price, right? And quantity demand increases. So again, we need to find that area between supply and demand. What is supply and demand? Obviously, supply is the quantity of products that a manufacturer or owner is willing to sell at different prices. And demand is the quantity of products that people are willing to buy, right? The market price is the equilibrium point between supply and demand. This is the price determined by supply and demand. So let's demonstrate this, right, with that example. If we look at the supply curve, right, the higher the price of that t-shirt is, the more sellers will be willing to supply, meaning that the more money they make, hey, let's sell as many t-shirts let's try to provide as many t-shirts as possible to get that revenue. Whereas demand is an opposite effect. The lower the price of the t-shirts, the higher the price of the demand. So you have sellers working with the supply curve and buyers using this demand curve, right? So where should you set market price? That's at the equilibrium point, or very close to the equilibrium point, where supply meets demand. And again, supply can meet demand at various points along these curves, but if you use a supply and a demand curve, you'll be able to help find that equilibrium point. So let's talk about competition within a free market. A lot of times we hear things on the news like Amazon's a monopoly, right? Well, if we take a look at these definitions between the competition within free markets, we have a perfect competition, right? This is where everybody has equal opportunities. Everybody can, the competition is wide open, and there is no favoritism towards anybody else. Nobody has a foothold on competition. If we go all the way down to 4, monopoly is meaning that one company controls the supply of a certain product or service. The 2 in between are varying degrees. Oligopoly is actually a group of companies that control the supply. So if you think about oligopoly, you're thinking of something like maybe it's Amazon and eBay and 2 other companies, and they control that equilibrium point or that price point because they control that supply curve. They can, no matter where that demand curve is, they can move that supply curve wherever they want to. Monopolistic competition is a little bit less. That's really what we live in now today. Whereas there's a handful of bigger companies that control that supply curve, and we can, as smaller companies, compete with that. Some benefits and limitations of free markets. Benefits: open competition among companies. Provides opportunities for poor people to work their way out of poverty. These are the benefits of free market capitalism. We've seen success stories every day about people making their way in the world, having nothing, and building an empire around it. In fact, a book just came out of Jim Haslam and Pilot Flying J, and how he built that corporation from basically nothing, right? There are also some limitations to free market capitalism. People may start to let greed drive them. People may start making decisions based off of how much money they can make and don't want to contribute to the economy and society as all. So there's a lot of benefits, but there's also some limitations that we have to be aware of. Let's talk about the next economic system. So we talked about capitalism, benefits, drawbacks. We talked about how supply and demand worked. Let's talk about socialism. And again, socialism is an economic system, and that's all we're looking at it. We're not going to judge it based off of this class. We're going to understand it and define what it is. Socialism is an economic system based on the premise that some, if not all or most, basic businesses should be owned by the government so that the profits can be distributed among the people evenly, right? So if you think about this, some effects of socialism are entrepreneurs run smaller businesses and not big businesses. Citizens are highly taxed in a socialistic economic system because you are spreading the wealth evenly among people. And government is more involved with protecting the environment and the poor. Again, this economic system is smaller businesses that are government owned or run, and citizens are highly taxed, but wealth is distributed equally among its people, protecting the poor and protecting the environment, and some people think that this is a good economic system. Some benefits of socialism: social equality, right? Everybody's at the same level. There's no top end wealth, the one percenters that we hear of. That doesn't exist in true socialism. There's no poor in socialism, but there's no rich. Everybody pretty much gets this wealth distributed equally. Free education, free healthcare, free childcare, longer vacations, shorter work weeks, and generous sick leave. You can see some of the benefits of socialism, but let's look at the negative consequences of socialism. There's few incentives for business people to take risks. Why would you start a business in a socialistic society if you don't want to succeed and make money? It's just very few incentives for people to open up a business and take risks, and this is actually harmful to the economy. There's also a chance of brain drain. And what I mean by this is that often the best and brightest people move to capitalistic countries, such as the United States, because they know that in a capitalistic economic system, they can make a lot of money. There's also fewer inventions and less innovation because the reward's not as great in capitalistic countries. So that's socialism. You can see that socialism, like capitalism, has its benefits and also its drawbacks. In fact, we'll talk about this in a second, but the United States is actually not a purely capitalistic society. It does have some elements of socialism in it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Communism. And again, this is just a study of economic systems. We're not talking about communism being a bad thing. We're not here to judge that. We're here to define what it is and understand it as an economic system. Communism is an economic and political system in which government makes almost or all of the economic decisions and owns all major factors of production. Prices don't reflect demand in communism, which leads to shortages of items, including food and clothing. When prices don't reflect demand, there is nothing holding supply up. That's what leads to shortages of items, including food and clothing. Most communist countries today suffer severe economic depression, right? Cuba is a communist economic and political system, and they have many, many problems with their economy. The Soviet Union, which is now known as Russia, was a communist country, you know, before 1988 or 1989, and it suffered severe economic depression. So there's been a trend towards mixed economies, and I gave you a hint about that in the United States. Two major economic systems: free market economies, economic systems in which the market largely determines what goods and services get produced, who gets them, and how the economy grows, and command economies, where economic systems in which the government largely decides what goods and services will be produced, who will get them, and how the economy will grow. In our free market economy, we tend to have a mixed economy of both capitalism and socialism. Economic systems in which some allocation of resources is made by the market and some of the government is actually probably the best way an economy succeeds, because you don't want a pure capitalism, but then again you don't want pure socialism either. So understanding the economy and understanding how well a nation is doing is important. And some key economic indicators include the gross domestic product. You'll hear this often referred to as GDP. And this is the total value of the final goods and services produced by a country in a given year. As long as a company is within a country's border, their numbers go into the country's GDP, even if they're foreign owned. When the GDP changes, businesses feel that effect. The gross output, this is a measure of the total sales volumes at all stages of production. Some other key economic indicators that we're well aware of is unemployment, right? Unemployment rate is the number of civilians who are at least 16 who are unemployed and have tried to find a job within the prior 4 weeks. Now, a lot of students don't understand this, but there's actually 4 types of unemployment: frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. The first unemployment, structural unemployment, this is caused by a mismatch between the skills that workers in the economy can offer and the skills demanded about workers by employers. And I'm actually from Cleveland, Ohio, and this is actually there's actually a lot of structural unemployment in Cleveland, Ohio, because Cleveland used to be a steel mill city. We used to have four steel mills in northern Ohio. But the problem was that a lot of steel is now being imported from China because it's cheaper to buy from China. So there's a lot of structural unemployment because there's a lot of workers in Cleveland that want to work, but they don't have the skills for the types of jobs that are available in Cleveland. So this is called structural unemployment. Cyclical unemployment is a component of overall unemployment that results directly from cycles of economic upturn and downturn. So right now we're feeling the effects of COVID-19 and cyclical unemployment because we're in a downturn because of COVID. Seasonal unemployment is when people are unemployed at particular times of the year when demand for labor is lower than usual. And if you think about seasonal type of unemployment, think about landscapers and think about people that mow lawns and things like that. These are examples of seasonal unemployment. And finally, frictional unemployment. This is time spent between jobs when a worker is searching for a job or transferring from one job to another. This is a temporary form of unemployment. Some other key indicators of economy: inflation and price indexes. What is inflation? Inflation is a general rise in the prices of goods and services over time. If you think about it, you probably your parents or the older generation above you have talked about, I remember when gas was this amount of money. So I'll be that older person that says, I remember when I pumped gas and it was 85 cents a gallon. I remember that to this day. Disinflation is a situation where price increases are slowing. The inflation rate is declining. This is an opposite. Deflation is where a situation in which prices are just declining. Stagflation is a situation where the economy is slowing, but prices are going up anyhow. These are all types of inflation. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, these are monthly statistics that measure the pace of inflation and deflation. Core inflation is CPI minus food and energy costs. And the Producer Price Index is an index that measures the change in prices at the wholesale level. Productivity in the United States. Productivity in the U.S. has risen due to technology. It makes production faster and easier. High productivity through computers and robots can lead to high unemployment. Think about it. As robots and computers can do more and more jobs, less people are needed. Now, the service sector, productivity in the service sector, new technology adds to the quality of services provided, but not to the worker's input. A new form of measurement needs to be created to account for the quality as well as the quantity of the output. Business cycles are periodic rises and falls that occur in economies over time. And if you think about it, we've all lived through these business cycles, right? There's 4 phases of long-term business cycles. There's an economic boom, and we witnessed this back in the 1940s. There's recessions, 2 or more consecutive quarters of decline in GDP, and we're actually living through a recession right now, and there was also another recession back in 2008. A depression is a severe recession, usually accompanied by deflation. Remember, we talked about deflation and what deflation was. Deflation was a situation where prices are declining and there's nothing that the economy can do about it. Depression hasn't happened since the late 1920s. But a recovery is when the economy stabilizes and starts to grow, eventually leading to an economic boom. And back in the early 30s, the recovery happened with the big deal, and we recovered as an economy. Some people believe that we recovered as an economy even further because of World War II and the need for goods and services to help fight that war. Fiscal policy is the federal government's efforts to keep the economy stable by increasing or decreasing taxes or government spending. Tools of fiscal policy: taxation and government spending. And if you think about that, we just witnessed fiscal policy. We just witnessed benefit packages and bailouts by the government putting money into our economy to help spur and to help keep it stable during the COVID crisis. In fact, we saw the Employees Protection Act, which gave small businesses money in the form to help keep people on payroll. This was all a form of government spending helping to keep the economy going. Because if the government did not give small businesses that money or businesses that money to help keep people on the payroll, it would have had an effect on the economy. If you didn't have a job, if you don't have income coming in, you can't pay for goods and services. And if you can't pay for goods and services, businesses aren't selling, and there's no revenue coming in. So again, the government had to step in and help provide government spending and give the people money, individual businesses money, so they could keep people on payroll and people still spending money, and it stabilized our economy. The national deficit. This is the amount of money the federal government spends beyond what it collects in taxes for a given year, and actually we're in a deficit. Debt is the sum of government deficits over time, and a surplus is when the government takes in more revenue than it spends. I actually lived during a surplus in the late 90s where our national debt was erased, and we actually had more money than what we were spending. Monetary policy. This is the management of the money supply and interest rates by the Federal Reserve Bank. The Fed's most visible role is raising and lowering of interest rates. When the economy is booming, the Fed tends to raise interest rates. But when it's doing poorly like it is, or it's in a recession like it is now, the Fed tends to decrease interest rates. And you'll probably read about that, how the mortgage rates are very low. I think that I saw them below 3%, which is amazing. Back in the 1980s, it was in the high teens, lower 20s. So that's quite a difference. So that's it for chapter 2. I'm glad we discussed it. You do have homework for this week. Let's pull up the homework. I need you to participate in how businesses can benefit the community. This in chapter 2, we talked about how businesses can benefit a community. We talked about the invisible hand theory. I need you to tell me how you feel that your favorite Knoxville area business benefits the community. Maybe it's with money, maybe it's with services and goods. Tell me how you think it benefits the community. And then finally, there's an assignment due for chapter 2. It's a list of questions. Simply download it and then go ahead and submit it by next week. Both assignments are due by next week.